No losses, I don't do lipo. A few screws loose in the head, I'm a psycho. Promise you the bar just as real as the bike though. Misunderstood, you can call me a typo. I shine hotter than the stars in the night though. Hate the who's, don't give me a title. Flipped in that set, so I don't worry the price though. Got scratched like mine, no, leave it to the tribal.
Boom, I'm like a bomb in the room. Blow up the spot, everybody gotta move. Life or death, everybody gotta choose. Life or death, not everybody gotta lose. I hear the talking, I just keep quiet. Learn to speak silent, don't yearn for violence. Popping like a man.
Be careful not to get too close, I might just go.
Welcome back for day 2 of the largest online advertising event of the year. Welcome back to AdWork. Today is gonna be our biggest day yet. It's jam-packed. We have speakers like Seth Godin, Craig Clemens, Neil Ali, Pat Flynn. It's gonna be amazing. And also, don't forget to do business by heading over to the marketplace. Make new friends and chat to old ones. You'll find them in the directory. And of course, we have our perks page. So make sure to grab all the freebies there. This is gonna be awesome. I can't wait. Welcome back for day 2. This is AdWorld. Pricing isn't always easy. That's why I'm very much looking forward to listen to Alex as he will dive into the hidden pricing forces that really make us think in a certain way about products and services. It's all about the psychology behind it, and I'm looking forward to learn how it's done. So the stage is yours. Welcome to AdWorld. This is Alex.
What they taught you in Econ 101 is a lie. See, you probably remember this chart. It may be the main thing that stuck with you, the law of supply and demand. Now, the law of demand says that whenever the price of something goes up, the quantity that people are willing to purchase goes down. And the opposite too, whenever the price of something goes down, the quantity that people are willing to purchase goes up. But if this is a law, it should always work. Let's put that to the test. I want you to imagine that you're at a restaurant and you see a dozen oysters for sale. At $54 total, they come out to $4.50 a piece. Now, that's not a particular bargain, but not out of the ordinary for oysters. You go ahead and purchase. I want you to imagine another time you see them for $3 a piece. Even better, of course I'm gonna buy the oysters. How about at $1.75? You know what? That is a great deal for 12 oysters. Well, I want you to imagine you saw a set of 12 oysters for a nickel a piece. Would you purchase? Probably not. You'd probably think that something was wrong with them. And that tells us that there are actually way more ways that people behave than the law of demand you learned in Econ 101 wants you to believe. Let's look at an example. Remember JCPenney? They were known for inflating prices way more than they had to, and then marking them back down with frequent promotions just to bring people into the store. Then, around 2010, a new CEO came in and said, you know what? This doesn't exactly feel like a transparent practice. Let's cut out all the gimmicks, cut out all the games, and stop making our customers clip coupons. Instead, we're gonna do fair and square pricing. No more big discounts, just the ultimate price that we would want you to pay, around that amount that you would have gotten with coupons anyway. What happened? Customers loved it, right? No more gimmicks, far easier to understand what things are worth. Wrong! Because of this move, JCPenney lost $985 million. What didn't they understand? They didn't understand that the reality was people loved the psychology of deals. Those discounts helped people feel like they were getting something of value that they were missing with fair and square pricing. Even though JCPenney got it wrong, you can master this. And if you do, you can accelerate your product sales, you can grow your revenue without having to spend more money to do it, and you can avoid those pitfalls by better understanding human behavior. Today, we're going to cover 4 things. First, I'll walk you through the framework that I use to master the psychology of pricing. And that starts with context creation. What's going on around your product that influences the value that people see in it? Then the design of your offering. How do you better craft your offering or product itself to succeed? And then third, origin story. What is the story you tell about your product to increase perceived value? Then we'll wrap up with a few case studies and real ways that I have applied these lessons to show you that you can do it too. Before we dig in, a little bit about me. I'm Chahin, and I went to Wharton undergrad where I was known as the marketing guy. I took 2 times the marketing courses that I had to graduate. There I had the good fortune of working with a professor, Jonah Berger, on one of his great behavioral economics books, Contagious, and that really made me fall in love with the field. I took those lessons and I started applying them at American Express and Lyft, and now I do this day in and day out at Hims and Hers, and I give talks all the time on behavioral economics and consumer psychology. That's why what you're getting today is over 100 hours of synthesized research and the most useful strategies. You know, there are a lot of, in my opinion, hard to scale pricing psychology tactics out there, like if people see a number that reminds them of their birthday, they're more likely to purchase. But I think those are marginal improvements. I'm going to focus you on the things that are likely to be most powerful. First, let's start with that first part, context creation. I want you to imagine you're on the Ecommerce website looking for a subscription. You see that they have 2 options. They have an online-only subscription, which gives you access to all of their articles for a year for $59. On the other hand, they have an online and print version of the year-long subscription, this time for $125. How do you think customers split in this case? Well, 68% of people choose the online-only version and 32% choose the online and print version. This makes sense. There's a materially cheaper option and it gives you what you want, access to all of the articles for a much lower price. Why not take that one? Now I want you to imagine another scenario. This time there's a new option in the middle. There's an online-only version for $59, a print-only version for $125, and an online and print version for, $125. How do we think the split breaks down now? Well, in this case, 16% of people choose the online-only version, 0% choose the print-only version. People saw through that. Why choose something if I could get way more value for the same price? And 84% chose the online and print version. That is a total swap from where the split was before. And it amounts to a 41% increase in average revenue per user just by adding what's called a decoy. What's going on here? Well, oftentimes it's hard for us to evaluate what something's really worth and make a choice on that. So by adding a decoy, an option that is similar to something in the set but slightly inferior, you focus customers' attention on those 2 things, show them that one is worse, and they end up picking the one that's superior. The key idea is decoys. When you want people to really pick a particular item from your portfolio, introduce a slightly inferior option that is similar and gets them to pick the better one. Now I want you to imagine that you are at a coffee tasting and there are spices provided on the table that you can put in your coffee. In the control condition of this experiment that was run, participants just had the coffee for free to taste. In one variant, they were able to get these add-on spices and they were presented in wonderful crystal jars. And in the other variant, you were able to add on spices, but in these broken styrofoam cups. Same spices, only thing's different is the delivery mechanism. What happened here? Well, it turned out most folks didn't add spices. There were things like cardamom and orange peel, and it was really just about the environment around the product. So for those people that didn't add any spices and tasted that coffee and saw these spice jars nearby, the crystal spice jar led to people having a higher favorability of the coffee. And the broken styrofoam cups, those people had a worse favorability of the coffee. It was the exact same coffee, nothing about it changed. The only difference was the spice containers nearby. Now I want you to imagine that you are at the beach with a friend and it's a hot, sunny day out. Your friend says, hey, I've got to run and make a quick phone call, but when I come back, I'll bring you a beer if you want. How does that sound? You say, oh, that would be great and so refreshing. It's so hot out. They say, awesome. How much would you be willing to pay for the beer? As long as it's under that, I'll buy it for you and bring it back. Now, imagine two different scenarios. In one group, that beer is coming from a local, kind of run-down grocery store. In another, the beer is being purchased from a fancy, upscale hotel located right by the beach. Now, it's important to note that the beer that's being purchased is identical in both of these places. There is nothing different about the product itself. What do we think happens? If we were purely rational shoppers, there should be no difference in willingness to pay. Well, of course that doesn't happen. In the rundown grocery store, people are really only willing to pay about $1.50. But when that exact same beer comes from a fancy hotel, they're willing to pay about $2.65. So what is the lesson here? It's that product environment is really important. In both the coffee spices example and the beer example, the things surrounding the product, not the product itself, determined whether or not people saw value in it. There's something called irrelevant anchors. In another experiment, the experimenters were in a stand on a boardwalk selling CDs. That was the target item. Now, there was a stand next door as part of the experiment, and there were two different variants. In the first variant, the clothing, the sweatshirt sold next door went for $10. In the second variant, the clothing went for $80. What do we think happened? Now, it shouldn't really affect the CD purchases or willingness to pay because it's not the target of what people were asked to buy. But there's a 23% increase in reported willingness to pay for that CD from an incidental price. These are called irrelevant anchors. In that $10 condition, people reported being willing to pay $7.29 for the CD. And in the $80 condition, people said they'd pay more, $9 on average for the CD next door. This is anchoring, and remember to use it when crafting the context around your product. The numbers nearby influence whether you buy. This time I want you to imagine that you're again in the grocery store looking at chocolate bars, and you see that in one instance you get 50% off that chocolate bar. In another instance, you got 50% off and there was a disclaimer that there was a limit of 10 per customer. What do we think happens here? That purchase limit actually boosted sales, that limit 10 per customer. This is a kind of scarcity, and it can really motivate customers to purchase. But it's not just quantity scarcity that's effective. Time scarcity can also work. Only available for a limited time. Expires after this date. Minimum purchase requirements also do this. Only available with a purchase of this amount. But what kind of scarcity is best for your product and brand? Not all scarcity is created equal. Let's take a look at two examples to figure this out. In the first, I want you to imagine you're deciding between two iPhones, assuming that you like iPhones. The first is a black iPhone, and it's paired with a message that says, limited supply, only 5 available. The second one is a white iPhone, this time paired with a message that says, high demand, this is nearly sold out. What do you think happens in this case? Well, here, the limited supply message helped sales for the black iPhone, and the high demand message hurt sales for the white iPhone. That's because this is what's called conspicuous consumption. Identity signaling products have their sales boosted by supply side scarcity. Now, what is identity signaling? It means it's a product that says something about you or confers status, and that in particular, people can see you using. Let's take a look at another example though. I want you to imagine you just ran out of shampoo, you're not particularly loyal to a brand of shampoo, and you're at the grocery store picking some up. Now again, you see the first shampoo and it is paired with a message, limited supply, only 10 available. The second shampoo you see says, hey, high demand, only a few left. This This time, what do we think happens? Do we think that high demand also hurts sales here? No, that's because this is called inconspicuous consumption. Identity agnostic and privately used products are boosted by demand-side scarcity. This is because people can't see the shampoo that you're using, so instead of trying to pick something that is going to signal your status or something about you, you want to know what people really love because it must mean it's working for them, and you use that popularity or high demand to choose which one you'd purchase. The idea here, wrapping these examples up, is scarcity. A limited availability makes people want it more. Let's look at an example of a product that Olay launched in the late 1990s called Total Effects. It was brand new to the market, and they did some testing to figure out the price that they should launch it at. They put into testing $12.99, $15.99, and $18.99. I want you to think back to the law of demand we talked about earlier. The lower the price, the more people should purchase, right? No, of course not. See, at $12.99, it appealed to the mainstream drugstore purchaser, but it totally alienated a huge group of prestige skincare shoppers. At $15.99, it was a total wash in the middle that appealed to nobody really, and purchase intent went down for both groups. But then here's where something really interesting happened. At $18.99, more people were willing to pay than at $12.99. You see, it appealed to both groups really well. It appealed to the prestige shopper. For them, it was high enough to be a credible prestige purchase while being a great value. And to the mainstream purchaser, it was sure a little bit more than usual, but still in that mainstream wheelhouse. See, what matters here is the positioning you pick. Olay could have said our positioning is drugstore, but they would have totally excluded a group that was willing to pay. So here they had to pick a masstige type of positioning and really appeal to what both of these groups wanted out of the product. The category that you pick can really influence how much people value your product and what they're willing to pay. Now, I want you to imagine that it is another sweltering day out. This time, you're not at the beach, but you are feeling parched. Well, let's say you're walking around and you see there is an oasis. There is a Coke machine right in front of you, and you start to approach it, and you see a new kind of sign on it. You see that it says thermodynamics. It is a hot day special. The price actually changed, and it is $6.99 to buy a Coke on this really hot day. How would you feel if you saw that? Well, probably pretty bad. Most of the public reacted poorly to this when they heard that this was an idea that Coke was considering many years ago. The reaction was so bad, actually, that there would be thermometers and machines that changed the price, that the CEO had to resign, even though no such machine had ever been created. But I want to do a quick thought experiment. I want you to imagine instead that rather than being a really hot day, it is a cold, freezing, snowy day. The thermometer is way closer to 32 degrees, and you see that it is a snowy day special for 99 cents. How does that feel? Does that feel better or worse? Well, I would argue that it feels much better, and the framing of this is what matters. When you frame it as a hot day special and the price goes up, you feel cheated and you feel like you're being price gouged. When the typical frame is that the normal price is on the hot day and you get a special on a cold day, it feels much more fair and reasonable. Something similar happened with ride-share pricing. You might remember surge pricing from Uber in particular. They would get written up all the time for this kind of surge pricing. And I never really understood why they would take this framing. It's similar to the hot day special. You're making people reflect on that kind of unjust, perceived as unfair situation. Why not instead, rather than calling things a surge or a peak hour, set prices based on off-hour discounts. Give people, when they're not looking at prices at those peak times, an off-hours discount. And instead, you've reframed this into a scenario where they're more likely to see it as fair. Here's the idea. It's framing. The angle you choose determines if people end up accepting it. Now that was all part one, the context around your product. Now let's dive into the design of your offer and product itself. Now I want you to imagine that you're shopping on two different electronic sites. On one site, you're looking for a pair of headphones and you see that it comes in at $150 on the product page. Now, on the other site, for the exact same pair of headphones, you see that it is $145 on the product page, but $5 at checkout for shipping. One of these feels worse than the other, right? Even though it's exactly the same price, that second one feels a little more painful than the first. This is prospect theory. It's this S-shaped curve around the psychological value we feel related to losses and gains. There are two things you should really know. First, that losses are felt more than gains. And second, that there's this diminishing effect. So that first headphone purchase we looked at $150 falls here on the curve, but that second one, $145 falls there on the curve, $5 over there, which means you total them and feel even more pain than you would have if it were $150 lumped together. Let's look at an example of a real experiment where discounts were broken out in one condition. So in the first variant, you get a lumped discount on a product. You can get 40% off, or you can get 25% off plus another 20% off. Which one do you think customers react better to? Well, it turns out customers really love the sequential discount. Even though the math is exactly the same, the amount that people pay in these two conditions is identical, people love getting the two discounts more. It's because of those segregated gains that we were looking at on that prospect theory curve. Now imagine a situation where you are ordering pizza. And in the first variant, people were allowed to scale up their pizza. It started with a base pizza at $5, and they could add toppings at 50 cents each, up to 12 toppings. In the other condition, they scaled down from a fully loaded pizza, starting with all the toppings at $11. So people could remove toppings at 50 cents savings each. What do we think happens here? In this case, in the first one, scaling up, people on average have about 2.7 toppings that they've added to the pizza. In the scaling down condition, it's 5.3 toppings added to the pizza. See, there's a 20% increase in revenue because those pains were grouped together, and loss aversion makes you feel bad about giving up those toppings that are already on your pizza. This, again, is prospect theory. Make sure you are grouping pains and segregating gains. Let's look at a different example. Imagine a hypothetical painkiller called Velodone RX. When people in the study were given this painkiller, in reality a sugar pill, it was paired with literature that said clinical studies show over 92% of patients report relief in 10 minutes. In the first condition, people were told the pills cost $2.50 each. In the second, only 10 cents per pill. And then afterward, people were given a series of shocks and reported whether or not the medication was effective. What happened? 39% more people reported reduced pain from the higher priced pill. That's 85% reporting reduced pain from the $2.50 pill versus 61% for the 10-cent pill. What's happening here, even though it was the identical sugar pill? It's that price can be a quality signal. Let's take a look at another experiment. Imagine you are shopping for some white wine for a dinner party, but before you pick, you are asked if you tend to buy cheaper wines or average price wines. Now imagine there are two different variants. In one, people are exposed to a sparse assortment of wine, only 9 to pick from, or a dense assortment of wine, 26 different white wines to choose from. What do we think happens here based on what we know about the shopper? Well, if they're a cheap price buyer, they have the highest willingness to pay when it is a sparse assortment and there's less to choose from. Well, that pattern must hold, right? No, it flips. For the average price buyer, there's much higher willingness to pay when there's a dense assortment and a lot to choose from. Those average buyers really wanted to evaluate far more wines. What's the lesson here? It's assortment design. You have to understand your user and how they tend to shop, what they're looking for in order to determine the ideal SKU count or portfolio size. Now I want you to imagine that you are shopping for a camera. And in one instance, you see that there's a basic camera at $169.99 or an upgraded camera for $239.99. What do we think happens? Well, the split tends to be even, about 50% by each of these two cameras. Let's add one more into the mix though, an even more premium camera at $469.99. Now what happens? This time, there's a 22% group of people that buy that basic one, 57% buy that upgraded camera, and 21% buy that premium camera. If we do the math on what just happened, there was a 33% increase in revenue just because you added a third higher price option. It's not just cameras though. This study also found that it carries across categories. On average, there was a 17.5% average share increase for that middle option when a third higher price option was added to the mix. The key idea here is the compromise effect. People tend to pick the middle option, so you can increase revenue and sales by adding a third higher price one. All right, we just thought about how to best design our offering to set us up for success. Now let's round it out with part 3, the origin story of your product. In order to understand what I mean by the origin story, let's look at a particular sparkling water company, Perrier. In the 60s, they were much smaller, and the CEO at the time wanted to enter the US market to really help increase sales. But that would mean convincing people in the US to pay a premium for a commodity good. McKinsey, the consulting firm, said, you know what, it's impossible to do it. Why would people in the US pay more for something that they're getting for free and delivered to them no less? What happened? Well, the critics were right. He couldn't really crack the market. People weren't willing to pay more for a commodity they were getting for free until they spun up a huge marketing campaign explaining the essence of the product. What did that look like? They ran TV commercials that said things like, deep below the plains of southern France, in a mysterious process begun millions of years ago, nature adds life to the icy waters of a single spring, Perrier, naturally sparkling from the center of the earth. And you can see print advertisements paid off. Similar ideas with sparkling water coming up from the spring there, naturally sparkling from the center of the earth, unlike those man-made carbonated drinks that you could get elsewhere. What happened after this campaign? A 120x growth in bottles sold between 1975, when they started the campaign, and 1988, largely attributed to it. That's a difference of 2.5 million to 300 million bottles sold. You've probably felt explaining the essence of products in other instances. Imagine going to a fancy restaurant and seeing all those long adjectives about how things are hand-picked or toasted or crusted in a way that you don't see at cheaper restaurants. This is explaining the product's essence. Describe what goes into making your product to increase value. That might be the raw materials, is something organic. You have to articulate the inputs and people will increase the perceived value that they have of it. Let's take a look at another way that you can explain a product's origin story of sorts, and that's how much effort goes into it. In one famous experiment, one group of people was told that a poem took 4 hours to write, and then were asked how much they thought it would go for price-wise. In another group, they were told that it took 18 hours to write, of course, the exact same poem. What happened here? In the 4-hour group, they had a lower liking of the poem and a lower willingness to pay. And in the 18-hour group, it was a higher liking and higher willingness to pay. What's going on here? It's called the effort heuristic. You can articulate how much work goes into something, how hard it was to make in order to increase perceived value and willingness to pay. One final question to consider. Can describing things in a unique way increase willingness to pay? Absolutely. In one experiment, researchers put different sets of products in front of people. down jackets, which were mostly described as having regular down fill, but one was described as having alpine class fill. It was largely the same, but described in an interesting way. For pasta, mostly regular pasta, but one described as authentic Milanese style, and the third CD players, mostly regular, but one having an attribute that was studio designed signal processing. Now, what happened? When these products with novel attributes came with a low price tag, there was virtually no change in preference because, hey, if that attribute was so special, it would be worth paying more for, right? And that's exactly what happened. When products had these novel attributes described and a high price tag, there was a 33-point change in preference for them. And when they had a premium price tag, even higher at a 44-point change. What's the lesson here? Novel attributes. You can brand and describe unique features of your products, even if they're largely similar inputs to the competition, to increase perceived value. To wrap up, I'm going to take you through 3 quick examples of how I've applied these lessons in my own work. For instance, when I was at Lyft, we worked to reframe how people thought about rideshare pricing. You'll remember we talked about people tend to think about those peak moments, so we wanted to reframe it and get people to think about when it was not in that kind of peak, and we added a bit of product copy that said this price is a good deal when it was as low as it could possibly be. Did it work? Absolutely. There was a stat sig increase in rides from that small amount of copy by the price. When we launched our Hims cologne and Hims and Hers, we were making a limited amount and we decided to brand it as a small batch cologne, using that lesson of scarcity to increase perceived value of a new product. And lastly, in our women's skincare line, the prescription cream is mixed for customers who get it. We decided to brand this as the fingerprint formula method, a cream that is mixed just for you based on your answers in small batches. You can see how we're using an effort heuristic here in describing a novel attribute, 2 ideas we learned about in part 3 to increase people's perceived value of an unfamiliar product. So with that, let's recap what we learned today. We learned about CDO, the context your product is in and what surrounds it affects willingness to pay. The design of the offering itself affects willingness to pay. And of course, the origin story you tell about your product. And with that, you have learned to be the CDO or Chief Decision Officer when it comes to the psychology of pricing at your company. If you enjoyed today and the 100+ hours that went into synthesizing this research, please give me a follow on LinkedIn. I'm working to double my followers and would so appreciate it. With that, if you remember only one thing, I will leave you with this. When you start with the mind, growth won't be far behind. Thank you.